People were coming out of the residential schools, coming out of child welfare.
Toronto is home to one of the original 6 friendship centers that opened in the 1960s. As more Indigenous people started relocating to urban settings, these community hubs were a gathering place rich with culture that provided essential resources and a loving environment for survivors of trauma.
It became obvious quickly that the people needed a place to feel safe, to be able to discuss the issues of the day and find solutions for themselves of how to help improve their quality of life.
The grassroots movement expanded over the decades, helping to restore Indigenous cultural ties. Now there are 29 locations across Ontario, including a second centre in Toronto.
We serve everyone from before birth, after death, and everything in between.
The Toronto Council Fire Native Cultural Centre at the corner of Dundas and Parliament began underground, joining the movement in the 1970s.
In the many years that followed until we moved here, we occupied basement spaces, right? We moved from basement to basement. And the irony was that it's been with churches.
This community hub interacts with over 200,000 people a year and is considered a second home to many. It's a food bank, employment center. It offers housing resources, health and legal services, and education and healing. It's also a place for cultural celebration, bringing Indigenous traditions to public spaces. Today and tomorrow at Nathan Phillips Square, everyone is invited to take part in the Indigenous Legacy Gatherings as our country gets set to mark the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Should programs like this be fully funded by the federal government?
Absolutely.
The Ontario Federation of Indigenous Friendship Centres helps support the 29 locations. While there are several sources of funding, the core operations are partially funded through Indigenous Services Canada. Federation CEO Gertie May Muse tells me the money they receive from the federal government is inadequate and hasn't been increased in more than 2 decades.
We are trying to keep what friendship centers we do fund stabilized. There is, especially with the inflation, all of the changes going on, the cost of living increases, friendship centers right now are really struggling with core operations. And so we would not be able to look to fund new friendship centers until we actually could secure additional resources.
Back in the spring, the National Association of Friendship Centers condemned the Trudeau government for excluding the needs of urban Indigenous communities from its latest budget, saying these vital cultural hubs stand at a crucial financial crossroad. CityNews reached out to the federal government this week to ask about funding. Even though they had days to respond, we did not hear back by deadline.
This is like a no-brainer. This is like, friendship centers have been involved with reconciliation since they opened their doors. Just because we're in urban centers doesn't mean that we should be ignored.
Shauna Hunt, CityNews.